So we are back to item 6. Okay, so I've got Sarah and Diane and Dave.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. You have in front of you a report on the draft submissions that we prepared for the Water Services Reform Bills. We're seeking approval of the submission on the Water Services Legislation Bill and approval for the submission on the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill. We've got a quick PowerPoint that we can roll through that will give you a high-level view of what's in these submissions, and just a little bit of background on what these bills are about. So you can see the second bill, the Water Services Legislation Bill, covers matters relating to roles and responsibilities of entities and councils, and you can see it amends a number of existing acts, including the Water Services Entities Act, which came into force the end of last year. It also details the transfer of assets from councils to entities, charging regime, compliance monitoring, relationship agreements, and offences and infringement regimes. In terms of our submission on the second bill, we have 7 areas where we've provided feedback. We are again urging the Select Committee to reconsider the inclusion of stormwater. So this follows from the submission on the first bill. So we're continuing that theme on. We're concerned about the transfer of stormwater assets and services, as this remains unclear to us, in particular transport stormwater systems not being included. There's a lack of public accountability in our view in the governance structure. Again, we raised this in our submission to the first bill, so we're raising that again. We believe there are oversights in this bill that could lead to loss of public amenity, particularly in terms of land being transferred which has mixed uses. There is no clear alignment that we can see in terms of the government's reform program. In particular, we're calling out the RMA reforms. There are potential implications for council in collecting the entity's charges that's proposed in the bill. So there's a lack of clarity again in terms of what's expected of council and the cost to council and our actual ability to do that. And we believe there's implications to the council operating practices and procedures. So the impacts of these reforms actually go further than the Three Waters team, obviously, and impacts across council and the council business. You'll find attached to this submission further detail on these points under attachment A. We've included a case study explaining the impacts on stormwater. That's under attachment B, and we've provided examples of dual purpose and mixed use council land under attachment C. In terms of the third bill, I'll just briefly talk to this one. The Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill, which is difficult to say, let alone read. So this establishes the Commerce Commission as a regulator of economic regulation and consumer protection regime. So it defers responsibility to the Commerce Commission to design and implement this regulatory system. So we've kept our submission on this one at quite a high level. These are the points that we raise, which will come as no surprise to you. And in terms of next steps, as per the report, we're seeking approval of these 2 submissions. Submissions are due on Friday, and then the Select Committee process continues and report back on both bills in May. Thank you.
Right, we've got Tyler and then Pauline.
Kia ora. Can we please talk about the point on, I'll just find it. There is a lack of public accountability in the governance structure. Can we talk through that a little bit? And sure. Can you sort of describe what you mean in that?
So in our first submission, we raised this point, and we're talking around the regional representative group,
Yep.
which has no more than half the members to be elected by some portion of residents, and there's, my understanding, no guarantee of representation on that group of any particular council.
Okay. And who's the half that isn't elected? Who are the half that is elected?
So that'd be representation from mana whenua.
Good.
I have more.
Yeah.
There's more? Yep.
I'm just trying to compose myself. Apologies. Around point 17, as you were talking about, were Ngai Tahu consulted upon on this clause that you were talking about in your submission? And how did they feel about it?
So just to probably clarify a little bit further, so in terms of the public accountability, what we're talking about is the overarching governance structure.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily the makeup in that sense, it's that Christchurch in particular is representing the largest portion of the population. However, we don't have any guarantee of any representation on those groups. So from a council perspective, we don't have that representation. And then in terms of the overarching governance structure, again, there is only a small portion of all of the different tiers of representation that there is any public kind of accountability or public ownership of in terms of who makes up that group. So it's not the division at that, it's the overarching representation.
Cool.
there.
So what you're saying...
It might be the terminology that's been...
Yeah, well, I just don't want to get caught up into the Wayne Brown, Dan Gordon schmozzle, to be honest with you. I'm going to be quite frank. And I want to empower mana whenua and provide something that's a lot different to this, because what it's doing is it's insinuating that we don't want mana whenua or co-governance.
Well, that's certainly not the intent of,
Well,
of
I read
the
it.
submission.
I read it like that. To be honest, I read it like that. A few of my colleagues have read it like that. So, I personally, I'd love just to go back, and I got another question around were treaty staff here talked to upon this, and did they read over it quite?
So we did consult with everyone internally and externally in what was required. So again, it probably is about the terminology or perhaps the way that it's been put in the submission. However, what that does mean is in representation in terms of Christchurch and how we can input into the overarching governance process. It does not mean the mana whenua engagement.
Okay, I completely
But we
understand
can
that.
definitely reword that to make sure that that's clear.
Yeah, and I do understand that point around we needing to have a voice at the table, seeing as we're a large part of this.
That is the point. Yeah.
Yep, and it's easily misread. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Good
you.
to know.
And that's one of my points, and that's one of the points I wanted to just put across. The other question I have is around the council as a whole. Around the stormwater and the parks and reserves, we're wanting to potentially make it 2 waters. Am I correct in thinking that?
Effectively.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Pauline? And then
Thank you.
Oh my
I'd quite
gosh, I'm
like
so
it if Tyler could actually point out actually where the wording is that you've got trouble with, so that we can have a look at it.
26.
26, thank you. And my question is around the Prime Minister has indicated some sort of a re-look at this, or a paused. Will that have any implication on the timeline for this? Or
Well, councillors, we simply don't know, because what we know is what is in the public domain that we've all seen, and what we're tasked with is providing submissions on the bills as they are today, on the timelines that we have today. But you're quite right, there could be a significant change in the near future, but we simply don't know that, so we're simply having to respond to what's in front of us today.
Okay, so that's normally the standard answer when I ask anything about the 3 waters. I don't know, so I'm not surprised. Thank you.
Apologies.
But at the moment, the train is going in that direction. We have no reason to believe that it's going to change. It may well do, but at the moment, you've got to stick with what's in front of you.
Absolutely.
Okay, Tyrone.
I'll just defer to Sarah. She can go ahead of me and I'll go.
Okay.
It's just that I've sent through some wording to Sam just now for an amendment or resolution that just asks us to remove sentence 2 from paragraph 26 and to replace it with wording which reflects our concern at the lack of a guarantee of Christchurch City representation on the representative group.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Yep. Thank you. I'll go down here. Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, look, thank you for all the work that's been done on this. Like, it's really comprehensive, and and I'm not going to pretend that I understand all the complexities of what we're trying to deal with. But a couple of things stood out for me, and I'd like to just support my colleague, Councillor Harrison Hunt, here about just the way that 26 came across, but also that there's no reference to our partnership, our treaty partnership within the entire submission. There's no reference to mana whenua, there's no reference to Ngāi Tahu and our obligations there, and I'm just wondering why that is. So that's question one, and question two is there's also no reference to the needs of Banks Peninsula. Christchurch is mentioned 26 times, 26 on the brain, 13 times, but Banks Peninsula is not mentioned once. It's not referenced to what its specific needs are, and God knows there are some terrible stormwater issues out in Banks Peninsula. So just keen to get your comments there.
Yep. So our submission is in response to the bills. So we try to keep our comments from this council in response to those bills, and so that's probably why we don't reference Ngāi Tahu and or the treaty, and in terms of Christchurch versus Banks Peninsula, we take this as a district submission, so we're not again trying to call out the differences between an urban and rural setting. We're trying to again focus on what is in the bill. The other reality, unfortunately, is the timeframes we have to prepare these, and the number of staff we have to work to across the organisation does place us under some pressures, and producing a submission like this, which we feel is very important to do, because these are very important matters for all residents of the district. Sometimes we're under a bit of pressure, and as per the previous one, we may not see the wood for the trees sometimes.
And I'd just like to again reiterate my acknowledgement of the hard work that's gone into it and the ability of the document to deal with all the complexities. There are just some key things that I just feel are just not covered, but I understand you're working to really tight time pressures, so thank you.
Could I just check whether your team could just have a quick review just to see if it is appropriate to add in Banks Peninsula or
Yes, we certainly will.
Aaron.
No, I'm all good, thanks.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. When this journey started, one of the problems or one of the issues that was raised was there were steps you could take or could be taken to air problems, but there was no obligation for Three Waters to actually uphold them and to do anything. And I think under 5.10.3, regulatory functions and powers, etc., has that changed at all? Or is that still, because that is a major problem. So, for instance, the new entity, whether it's A, B, C or D, or its entirety, has no obligation to uphold any complaints or to deal with them. They only had, it was worded that they would listen to them, which is pretty insulting, really.
There are some provisions for that, however they are still relatively high level in terms of how they provide, so how that actually be practically implemented is still slightly unclear. So there is a little bit, but probably not to the extent that we would necessarily feel comfortable with.
You wouldn't go as far as say they're an improvement to the original?
I mean,
Just saying. Just sorry.
matter of opinion now.
Little
Yeah.
improvement, but I think one of the key themes through this is continued lack of clarity.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Yanni?
Thank you for the work that you've done on this. I just wanted to ask in terms of page 21, which is the submission to the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill. And I was just concerned that underpaid on point 7, you say water services monopolies unlike power and communications utilities, but actually you also refer to saying that council generally supports the use of Commerce Commission. I guess I was concerned that actually fibre and power do have network monopolies. So I'm not quite sure that, I just think that that section possibly needs a bit of rephrasing. And also, actually, the evidence is that the Commerce Commission has been pretty hopeless, actually, when it comes to things like telecommunications and power. And what we've effectively seen with the latest disaster up north is, the whole issue of going away from copper and people not having access to emergency communications. And, there was comment on radio this morning just around our infrastructure not being up to scope. So I just wondered whether we need to put a little bit more thought into the reliance on the Commerce Commission versus having some other arrangement, possibly an ombudsman who can, or some other mechanism. But yeah, I was just concerned to see that we were relying on the Commerce Commission when, you can take fuel companies, supermarkets, banks, telcos, all sort of exist in a realm of not really being regulated to protect the consumer as much as possibly we should, especially on an important issue like water.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Celeste?
Yeah, no, I think the what you guys have done is really incredible, given the complexity of the work, so well done. I would, of course, like to just echo some of the comments that have been made around making sure that we sort of adequately address our treaty obligations, but that's been covered. Just under 13, I think you've covered the stormwater and the complexities around that, from my understanding, really well. And I'm not sure whether it's worth adding in comment that with flood management and stormwater, there is kind of an increased urgency to address those issues, and any delays would be disastrous in some or all parts of the city. But for any work that is being delayed at the moment through our own annual plan process or through this process, will have other downstream effects, no pun intended. But yeah, thank you for your work on that.
And Aaron?
Just around the, when you look at the summary of our number one priority is to deliver the water, but the C word's missing, chlorine, but we haven't said safe drinking water without chlorine. We haven't kind of made that really clear, and there's that government decision to, well, unless we kind of tell them quite clearly, as the second largest city of New Zealand with incredibly safe drinking water, we don't want chlorine, I don't know that the message will get across. Should be in every submission. And that we're not really in favour of three waters either, but it's like, I'm not sure. But, well, that's where it should start, is that we are reluctantly submitting on something we're not in favour of having our assets stolen, and we want safe drinking water without chlorine. Now, let's talk.
So yeah, we've basically just focused on the specifics within the bills. So there is obviously issues there. We can put something in if that's what the council decides and wants. At the moment, they're currently just specifically based on what is in the bill.
I'd be surprised if any of my colleagues didn't want chlorine mentioned, given that we get overwhelming feedback from our community on it. Does anyone not want chlorine mentioned? Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, reiterate the points we made. Thank you.
Okay, so you've done? Yep, Pauline?
I was just going to suggest that you have noted the murkiness between Taumata Arawai regulation and the Commerce Commission regulation. You could say, for example, the chlorine, where would that sit, perhaps? I don't know.
Thank you. Yep.
Slip it in there somewhere. I agree, we should mention it every time we can.
So just for clarity, are you wanting us to have an opening statement saying that you oppose Three Waters reform?
Yes, please.
Can we just check though? We've been really clear in the past that we don't oppose reform. We oppose the current proposal because everyone knows that the current status quo isn't working.
I think we've got to be clear.
So
though.
we
It is
can't just say we
oppose
oppose
Three Waters,
reform.
the
We
Three
have
Waters
to
reform as it is.
oppose the
Okay,
current proposal.
I think everyone knows where we all stand, and I think you've got it pretty well covered in the submission.
Thank you. Just wanted
And
clarity.
just one more that in the number 2, when you've put major changes occurring at the same time as significant overhaul of resource management system, you should also probably include an end the Local Government Act review for local government, because in actual fact, if they'd done that review earlier and looked at our funding, we wouldn't perhaps need this model.
It was a bit cart before the horse. Wasn't it?
The cart before the horse, yes.
Yep.
I think it would be quite nice if we did emphasise the local government reforms.
Yeah, again, we've tried to keep this submission to the bills
Yeah.
that are in front of us, as opposed, in the first submission, we addressed some of the broader issues. But we can reiterate, as other councillors have suggested, some of the points we made in our first submission. But yeah, we're just trying to keep ourselves focused on the bills in front of us as well.
But these are just small additions, and
Yep.
you never know, it may be a different person reading it. So let's just say it again, Sam.
Okay, so I'm keen to move this on. And how quick is your question, matey?
Just very quick. Just wanted to check that this bill will require us to ensure that every house has got a meter so they can be charged. Do we know what the cost of doing that would be? And if we do, can we put it in the actual submission?
You move it.
No, I don't know the cost of that, and I don't think we've got the ability to draw that information in the timeframes that we're working to.
Right. So sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Yanni. Did you ask me a question? I was busy talking.
I mean, if we have to put meters in every single house so that they can be charged for water, that's a massive cost on us. And
yeah, but that's got nothing to do with what's sitting in front of us at the moment.
Also, that would be
I
the
think
cost
the
of the
officers
entity.
said that they haven't got the ability to get that information and put it in time for the submission. So it's something that if and when the information comes to hand, we could certainly get it to you,
So
but
it's
we
just-
haven't got time.
okay.
We're
So
in the
it's just
dark just
30
about as much as everyone
I get
else.
that. So just 36 point, second bullet point, even if we got a kind of ballpark figure, I mean, I would have presumed with the excess water charging, we must have some sense of what that
Yeah,
would
but it's
be.
got nothing to do with this bit. I know what you're
does.
saying. It is
read
coming.
36 second bullet point down, where it says our current systems may not be able to support collection of entities' charges without investment in those systems.
Oh,
It's
we're
unclear-
talking our internal systems within council. We're not talking about water meters there.
No, it's about the actual
Our financial
mechanism
systems.
of collecting money on behalf of a third party.
Right. So would water meters, if people didn't have a water meter, they wouldn't be able to be billed?
Well, that would be
Well,
the
it's-
Yeah, no, we're getting into the
that would be
weeds.
the
Sorry.
entities issue,
So,
and that's not what this
I
bill's
have a
about.
mover in Melanie, and I have a seconder in Sam, but Tyrone's got one more question.
It's just a point of clarification, actually, like with all the recommended suggestions, like how do they get incorporated? Like we're going to, so they have been. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, so we're voting on that now. Okay, yeah.
Okay. So what Sarah's put up there, just
Can we? And sorry, based on that, though, can we vote on them separately,
if you want to.
please?
Okay. Right. So we've got a mover and a seconder. So righto, Mary, how do I do this
So
one?
you could just, is it just A and B you want put separately there,
Or the whole lot is
or
one.
1 and 2?
1 and 2.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll now I'll put the motion for all for number 1, which is up there. Okay. If you debate, if you want it. I didn't think there'd be a hell of a lot, but anyway, far away. Jake.
Oh, sorry, no, that was me saying one debate, not two debates on.
Oh, yeah, fair comment. Yeah. Any debate, Tyler?
Kia ora. I apologise for jumping this on everyone, and I just wanted to reiterate, as a new councillor, it's a lot of reading, particularly on the upswing, and it's about 45-hour week. I worked last week, and on top of that, we've got to read at night time when we put our baby to bed. So, I first of all, do want to just note and apologise to my colleagues and the staff about jumping on this point. Secondly, I just wanted to reiterate the value of our relationships across the board, and this, out of all bills and all reforms that we're getting across our table, that mana whenua relationships are absolutely instrumental in this bill itself, and this issue itself, out of all of them. And I understand that staff are there for the structural components around these reforms, but also it's always good to collaborate outside of places, and I can understand that we are all human and we miss things. So I just want to make sure that we're putting in that we value our relationship with mana whenua, and we value all the knowledge that gets passed down, because 183 years ago we signed a document together to ensure that this all worked out. And that is on the basis of tēnā rangatiratanga, land, water, rights. Cool. That's pretty much me. So thank you very much, staff, for all of your work. And I just wanted to note that. Kia ora.
Yeah. Look, this whole reform process has been, as we know, intense, murky, and above all rushed, which you have noted in the submission. Thank you. After all, it was only introduced in December 22, and it's occurred over the period when we've all been impacted really heavily by COVID. The three water reforms, together with the RMA, the local government review, and many others, have actually placed a massive strain on our council and our staff and us as elected members. Through time pressure and demands for massive volumes of information we hold in our delivery services, and in the loss of staff through the transition as well. And all during COVID, where we have battled with reduced staff resources anyway, sometimes up to 30% down. And we've endured pressure to deliver multiple submissions in a very, very tight time frame. We all know about that. The submissions rightly call out the lack of detail, particularly around the financial impact and loss of stormwater assets, which, combined with recreation and environmental facilities, will have an impact on our amenity. And costs of council invoicing for charges, which, by the way, will be for every single drop, not just excess over a certain allowance, and how council will recoup the costs for this service. And lack of detail around Crown infrastructure contribution charges, as the bill currently exempts it. There's also confusion around, as I said, the roles for Taumata Arawai and the Commerce Commission in making regulations. So in my view, considering these and many other areas of lack of detail and lack of clarity, lack of answers, which makes compiling a meaningful submission very, very difficult, I support the Prime Minister's decision to pause for a rethink until these issues are clarified. They must be clarified. And once again, with other councillors, I really want to thank staff for the work that you've done on this again. Probably a lot of it done over the Christmas period. It's a very good submission, I think, and very much hope is considered very carefully by the Select Committee. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's odd for me, I think, when we look at why this started. It was all about getting drinking water to people, every single person in this country. And yet, when you look at this legislation when it started, the Three Waters, the one thing that it did not allow is for people to have a voice. Because in the process of, as they described it in the original drafts, that if you had an issue, it could be listened to, it could be verbalised, but there was no obligation for anything to be done about it. I remember way back when the RMA first started, a person on the West Coast was allowed by the Commissioner to sing a song about how passionate and how their environment and how important it was to them and their community. Nowadays, with the RMA, you need 3 lawyers, you need a doctorate, even before you're allowed in the door. I think that this is, from the government, the worst piece of Three Waters legislation that you could actually put in front of the people of New Zealand. So I really want to thank our staff for doing what they're doing. And I think it's a good fight and one that we should have. And I'm dubious if there's going to be that much change, but I think the chaos in it will make a lot of people very rich, but not the right people. Thank you.
Okay, Melanie.
I just wanted to say I think this submission's actually quite brilliant, and it says a lot of strong words in there, and in particular about the stormwater assets, those points 5 and 6, about raising the question of who will be responsible for responding to a significant storm event like we're seeing at the moment. These sorts of points are massive, and I think that's probably, for me, one of the most important things in looking at things holistically, which our council actually has a great history of doing. I also wanted to say that I value the input of our new councillors, because it's actually quite interesting when you're deep within something that you don't see things from the outside, you see them from the inside. And so it's good to have that look upon it in the way that you've given today. So thank you for that. And I would actually like, if we're able to add, just to mention about Banks Peninsula in the resolution to satisfy Tyrone. Would that be all right to add a point about that? Or not? No, okay. Anyway, so it would be good to see that. So thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, staff, for all your effort on this. And it's an incredibly rushed process that this government has thrust upon us with this. And to me, rushing legislation of this nature through is, I don't know, it's wrong on so many levels. And I appreciate the work that everyone's having to put into it to get our submission into this. And fundamentally, I think pretty much all of us, we're hearing from our constituents continually that we're not in favour of this Three Waters, and it'd be nice if the government would actually recognise that the pressure they're putting on local government to meet their agenda and their reform. The loss of local control and input into the processes coming out of this is quite astonishing. And I hear what Councillor Coker was saying there about the response to emergencies is going to be a rather interesting one to watch. I just really want to thank staff for what you're doing and what you've done, and hope that we get listened to by the government when this goes to select committee and proceeds through the legislative process, and hopefully we can get an outcome that we can all live with in the end, and perhaps put the brakes on the process so that we can actually get it right before it gets passed into law and takes it out of the control of those that actually rely on the services they use day to day. So thank you for all you've done, and here's hoping the government listen.
Thank you, Mark. Sarah.
Kia ora. As we've seen in Auckland and other parts of the country and other times, in fact across the North Island at the moment, stormwater is absolutely integrated with land use planning, and if entity D or another entity isn't also doing land use planning, there will be a huge disconnect between what happens in our district plans, where we build homes, and how we manage our storms and our floods. You cannot separate land use and water. And I strongly believe that the government need to take stormwater out of this. I'm actually not particularly fussed about the drinking water and wastewater. It's pipes and pumps, it's basic built infrastructure that can go in wherever. It's not like someone's stealing it, they're going to pick it up and take it off your street and you're not going to have it anymore. Not that fast. But when it comes to stormwater, the current proposal simply doesn't work if we're trying to build a more resilient future. In the past, yes, many councils, most councils, have not done well. We have had many homes built on floodplains. We know more now. Christchurch has done really well since our floods in 2014. It was a moment of clarity for the city that was exacerbated by the earthquakes and land subsidence. But we have spent most of the last decade actually acting on that. We have bought out properties, we have built hundreds of hectares of stormwater detention basins. In a flooding event that doesn't qualify to be a civil defence emergency, what happens in those stormwater detention basins if they're held by Entity D? Who makes the decision as to when the gates are lifted and the water comes down our rivers. That's really not clear, and it's of utmost importance for us as a city when we're building our resilience that those things are fully integrated. I'm really glad the issue was raised over the sentence in paragraph 26. And I do think that if stormwater is removed, that we do need to find a way as a city, as a nation, to be able to incorporate co-governance into our stormwater systems. We're doing that in Christchurch with the Avon-Takaro River Corridor. We passed that unanimously in the last council that we will have co-governance over that area. And it's an area that is crucial for flood protection for our city. And we need to find other ways to do that as well. But I think that should be a separate piece of legislation. And that's probably it. Thanks.
I'm glad we're having a bit of discussion around this, and I fully endorse the words of Councillor Cotter. She put it really well and has been banging on since the start of this whole thing. It's not about restructuring. It's not about the restructuring of water. It's how water services are funded, and that's ultimately the problem for a number of councils across this country. And let's not forget, the original problem here was not Christchurch Water being run by Christchurch people. It was the government regulator who failed to find the problems that were in Hawke's Bay. Remember, there was a monitor who had a role based out of Wellington who got it wrong, and the sheep excrement got into the drinking water, and from there on it went pear-shaped. And so instead of fixing the problem there and then looking for others similar, they threw the baby out with the drinking water, and now we've got the Three Waters reform, which went from a few $1 billion to tens of billions of dollars to hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's without them starting to spend the money, and that will just create another spiral of inflation in this country on resources. So it will be incredibly expensive for a city, the second largest city in New Zealand, who no one has ever got sick from our drinking water. That is to quote the medical officer of health, in case anyone's thinking I made that one up. No one has ever got sick from our drinking water. We have very good staff in the city. We have very good systems. We chlorinate when we need to, which is after a natural disaster. Beyond that, the people of Christchurch, and if Wellington are listening, hopefully they've got some bugs in the room. If Wellington are listening, we don't want chlorine in our water, and we want to run our water services ourselves. And so by making that small change there, we get those words in this, because the new Prime Minister has already said, or already made some changes to the programs they want to roll out. So if they're ever going to listen, it is right now. So putting that in, and like Pauline says, we should say it every single time, because there will be, chances are, a new person reading the next report. So that's all I wanted to say, and hopefully this will go through today, and thank you to the staff for this, and keep up the fight.
Thank you, Victoria.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. We're here in this particular point in our meeting to debate our submission on the water services reform bills. This is not a free-for-all discussion for everybody to tell us what their views are on the substantive issue. I'd really like to see us using this time cooperatively for debate purposes, and I'm not hearing a great deal of debate. Nobody at this table is a fan of the reform, and we all know that. So from my perspective, I think the submission that is in our papers covers everything that it needs to at a very high level. Thank you for the slight tweaks that we have had, and I'd like to thank you for your work on it, but I really can't see that there's a hell of a lot of improvement to be made with just a general free-for-all discussion.
Okay, no, good. Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I just to commend the staff for a lot of work into the submission. I think it's an excellent submission. I just thought one thing that we should actually point out as a city is that we actually have a proud legacy of, in recent times, working with mana whenua over getting good outcomes. And I just want to give the example of the Whakaora Healthy Harbour, an aspirational plan to restore the cultural and ecological health of Whakarapo. which is already bringing about change and winning awards. And that plan was a direct result of a commitment between mana whenua and local governance bodies, a unique example of successful partnership and collaboration in environmental management. And so, I think the reality is, in my point of view, that the examples that we're giving are good, and maybe we need to give that example as well, because this council and this region has actually taken leadership in addressing some of these very significant challenges around water. And it seems inherently unfair that we are penalised with these reforms, as my colleague has pointed out, because of something that went wrong that was a completely different set of circumstances than us. As a city and a region, what we know is post-disaster, when you recover from events, it's much better to work with people together on the ground and build up your recovery that way, rather than have things imposed upon you from the top. So I share the concerns that are in the submission. I acknowledge actually that we should, at a local level, continue to work with mana whenua in the positive things that we're already doing. And there was also the other example around the Avon-Otakaro River corridor. So, I would hate for anyone to get the impression that somehow raising concern under paragraph 26 is somehow at the expense of mana whenua. Actually, we've got a track record in some of these innovative ways of working together that brings people together, that gets positive outcomes in our city. And I just think it is a real good submission to highlight the concern. I just quickly touch on number 2 rather than debate it when it gets put. And that is to say that we strongly should make the concerns raised that we are in our submission. It is deeply concerning and troubling that the lack of regulation around how people can be charged for water, how water charges will be carried out and determined, is left to the Commerce Commission. And, remember the electricity reforms when we were told that would lead to cheaper power prices for the consumer. And in fact, the worst outcome has happened. Prices have gone up. A whole bunch of people at the top have made obscene profits at the expense of local people and local resilience.
Okay, so I haven't had my talking stick yet. Just for very, very quick, everyone's thanked staff, and I must reiterate that David and his team, especially Sarah and Diane down the end there, fantastic work, a lot of effort. When we've had staff have had RMA, intensification, future for local government, this 3 water stuff all in there. It is just, and as Tyler said, there's a shed load of stuff we've got to read through. So congratulations, everyone. So now I'm going to put number 1. Yes. Sorry, you didn't have a go, did you? No, well, I didn't see anyone else with their hand up. So if you've got something to debate. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Sorry. Look, so many people have said big ups to staff. And look, again, I reiterate, it's really, really complex what we're trying to deal with here. There's a lot of messages about a whole lot of interlocking things that are really, really hard to be able to articulate really, really clear points on. So thank you so much for the work that you've done there, and I really support that. In terms of the proposals that we have up there, like I'm just going to signal, I actually support number 2, and I just want to acknowledge my colleague Councillor Kewen about his comments around chlorination of water out on Banks Peninsula. We've had some really interesting issues with one of the communities out there, and who are absolutely opposed to chlorination. So I think that we need to be really, really strong on our positioning there. With 1, I'm going to abstain. Like, there are a lot of things about this whole process that I feel uncomfortable about. Like, from the very start, there are things there are lots about the reforms that I like, and there are lots of things that I am uncomfortable with. But in general, I think the reforms are a good thing for the peninsula. So I'm generally supportive of reform. And, like, whether it's drinking water in Akaroa, whether it's stormwater and wastewater in Littleton, whether it's the way that we've worked with Ngāi Tahu, which I'm really, really uncomfortable with, and the tone that we're setting out in this in our submission, I'm uncomfortable with, I mean, right now as I speak, there's water flowing all over the roads of Rapaki, and has been for months and months not being fixed because of a chronic underinvestment in infrastructure over decades, over a century, and that's because the model that we have hasn't worked, and so we do need reform on some level. So, and I appreciate that that a lot of people are not comfortable with the pace of reform or the way it's going in general, but I think that we are crazy if we don't think that we need reform, and so I'll be abstaining on one due to my discomfort and the general tone of it. Thank you.
Okay. Now, is there anyone else that hasn't had a debate but would like to have one? Thank you very much. So I will now put item 1 that you see there in front of you. All those in favour? All those against? And abstention. Tyro. Okay. So that's carried, that part. So I'll now put all of item 2. All those in favour? All those against? Carried. Thank you very much. We will now have a cup of tea. So how does 10 to 12